Our talk today is titled "Where Product and Data Meet," and I would say it's a bit less of a technical talk and much more about a talk about the process of technology and how our two areas kind of came together to solve some problems together. And those problems were technical problems, but really it was sort of the approach and how we evolved, how we were making decisions and so on. That's the story here. And obviously, if there are specific questions about our stack and about what we use and how we use it, we can do that at the end. So just a quick overview, FreshBooks, we make cloud accounting software for small businesses. We call them our owners. And so our goal is to make accounting easy and seamless for them because they have a lot of concerns. They want to run their business and they don't want to spend a lot of time on accounting. So that's really what we do. I'm Senior Director of Engineering here. I oversee a number of teams that develop parts of the product, as well as some of the technical teams, for example, storage and security and so on, that help deliver our SaaS platform. I come from an engineering background, specifically engineering physics, with a mechanical engineering specialty, which I haven't used for a very long time, because I've been in SaaS software development and management for a long time. So I started off in relational databases, did some data warehousing, and probably did something that we didn't call data engineering at the time, but pretty sure I was doing that as well. And I've worked in primarily B2B spaces, marketing automation and relationship intelligence prior to FreshBooks. Go ahead, Fiona.
Yeah, thanks, Andrea. Hi, everybody. I'm Fiona. I recently joined FreshBooks as a staff data engineer. My main responsibility is to help the organization to figure out the data technology roadmap. And before FreshBooks, I worked in an IoT company for over 7 years, where my major focus has always been data. I did some data analytics and data engineer hybrid work to start because it was only 2 people in that team. I kind of do everything around data. And then as the team grew, I shift my focus more onto building up data platform and infrastructure, specifically to bring data in, to have data be consumable. And in between, we have data governance in place. And my engineering journey, I started to work with GCP and BigQuery technology from more than 7 years ago. It was always made me proud because we are one of the few very early BigQuery technology users. And I personally been through a journey starting from a team with only 2 people to a team with dozens of people. And we have terabytes, started with terabytes scale of data to petabytes scale of data. And our infrastructures have been involved in several versions, but ended up being a quite scalable one. And what makes me excited is now I enter a new industry, which is accounting and finance and cloud services. But I believe some of the experience are common across industries. That makes me quite excited. That's about me.
Great. So a quick overview. We're going to give you a very quick overview of a little bit of our architecture. We're not really going to dig deep into that, like I mentioned. And then we're going to talk through a set of challenges our collective organizations were facing. So I'll call it the product. I might also call it engineering, which are the set of teams that build our product and deploy our product. And then we call it data engineering, the team that Fiona works with. And so they're responsible for taking a number of sources of our data and and making that available to various business users and so on. And she'll explain that much better than I will, obviously. But we both had these really large initiatives underway. On one side, a number of cluster upgrades, relational database upgrades, and then on the other side, pipeline rebuilds and replatforming of all of our data pipelines. And so these are trying to happen simultaneously with some mishaps. And so we want to talk through a little bit about what those were and how we could do this better in the future. And so really this talks about breaking down silos, really aligning with our collective outcomes, our collective needs, and understanding better the long-term vision. Okay. So this, I'll be honest, this diagram, like it's not meant to be read. That's not the point of this diagram. The point is really to give you a sense of our overall product service architecture, which is namely, we have a number of different services. One of our services is quite large. I'll call it a macro service, and that has to do with our accounting data domain and all of the features provided for that. And so that's a series of sharded databases where the customer data is spread out across a number of different databases. Then we also have a number of other smaller services, let's call them microservices. And we have a number of different databases and schema for each of those different services. So collectively, it's quite a large cluster, and there's a lot going on there. We then replicate all this data into a thing we call the combined replica, and that's really, it has two main purposes right now. One is to enable queries that span the gamut of all this data if we need to do some analysis or some troubleshooting or just understand different elements of our data and our system as we're working on it. And number two, it's really the integration point with Fiona's world and the data infrastructure. So that big red arrow and that brown databasey thing there is really the point of contact where our data and the product gets replicated there, and then from there it moves over to the data infrastructure. And so we've had some historical challenges with this. First of all, some time ago, there wasn't really even a clear owner of who owned this database because it's kind of in this in-between zone of product and data. We also have a number of issues. If there's ever a replication failure, we get data discrepancies, and DBAs have to go in and make some fixes and like manually rerun things or rebuild things. And it's just been a really a fair amount of effort for the amount of value, I would say, that we get out of it. I mean, it's needed right now, but you'll see that might change. And the other problem that sometimes comes out of this is that when we make schema changes on our applications and our services, those schema changes flow down through to the data world, to the data infrastructure, and they can sometimes cause downstream errors. Like that's actually, it's not that common, but it is possible for that to happen. And so these are some of the big picture issues that we've sometimes been facing with this structure.
Yeah, with this diagram, you see the current status of our high-level data engineer architecture. It's a little bit blur, but I will talk about it. So it's not logically, we follow the pattern where the infrastructure is being structured into several areas. One is data ingestion, which means we bring external or internal data from various source systems into our big data environment that is supposed to support data-driven operational analytics and to provide better customer experience through our product and marketing activities. And the second is the raw data area, where we kind of manage all sorts of raw data from all kinds of the source systems and apply certain data governance and privacy policies there. And the third is data transformation, where very rich computation are happening there. And then next is data consumption, where we will share the data insights to all sorts of downstream systems and also our BI reporting. So within the tech stacks, we are all of our services and infrastructure are hosted in cloud. We used to have AWS setups, and now we are in the process of migrating everything into GCP. And we use sorts of third-party tools, as well as some building home data ingestion tools. On the transformation side, we use dbt and Apache Airflow, which is also hosted on GCP by Google. And BigQuery is our main data warehouse now. So this architecture is built gradually in the past few years. So what that means is it doesn't start with a big or holistic blueprint. It started from some individual department needs for being able to see certain reports to support like internal operational purpose. And then gradually, the capability being expanded to support enterprise level business intelligence reporting. And now, as a business grows, we started to think about how we can leverage the data that we have to do some proactive data analytics and product to better our customer experience and to expand our business. And so with that, so there are quite a few legacy applications that has been built for isolated use cases. And now we're in the progress of figuring out a standardized framework. And obviously, like when talk about a standardized framework, there are going to be some ideal status, but how to balance the short-term needs and a lot of conflicts versus the longer-term ideal situation is not a like one night kind of thing, overlap thing. And I think today, like I and Andrea, just picking one thing to talk about with one example. The thing is like, how can we work together to shape a scalable infrastructure around data and product to empower the business? And what we're going to take one example, project example, to show that the problems we encountered, the challenges we are dealing with, and to basically talk about some of our retrospective like thoughts on how we can better work together in the future. So the project we're picking is basically starting from last year or even earlier. PD engineering need to upgrade their backend MySQL database to a newer version because the older version basically ends the life of support. And not until very late in their upgrade stage, where we realize that the interface, which is the combined replica that Andrea talked about, actually affects our downstream data pipelines a lot. Because in previous diagrams, you can see like the combined replica database is actually a very crucial interface between PD engineering and data. At the same time, data team, we're a small team, and data team is working heavily on a different OKR project, which is to migrate everything from AWS to GCP. And that basically, we have challenges to acquire like resources and time to really think things through and plan things well. And at the same time, the third-party tool we're leveraging before to moving data from this combined replica to our data warehouse. Basically, we figured like it has compatibility issues with the newer version of MySQL. So basically, we figured that we actually need to replace the whole tool and platform. So that leaves us a platform, a big platform to actually rebuild.
And so when Fiona and I were kind of talking about this talk, we were kind of like, what was the crux of what was going on? And really, her team was small and was forming. It wasn't a very large team and hadn't historically been even a formal team some years prior. It was really just a collection of people kind of working on some of those tools she mentioned and some of the homegrown solutions. And also on the product engineering side of things, the storage team was relatively new themselves. And so, these two teams that weren't sort of well entrenched with a long-term relationship were making these decisions very much in silo. Not on purpose, not intentionally, but they each created their own OKRs. As an organization, we're growing and scaling, and so it's for those who maybe haven't been at an organization of this size, there's growing pains that come along, and this was one of our growing pains, which was really we each had these two different projects going on that we didn't fully realize how connected they were. And I know it sounds strange to think about it because we're presenting the viewpoint here, but if you can try and picture different people from different sides of this, just sort of, working on their day-to-day work and like not realizing the other side and how there are these interdependencies. Again, coupled with that fact that combined replica wasn't fully owned by any team for a period of time. It was a little bit loose, and it was sort of like a best efforts to support it. Just, again, growing, lots of new people, lots of things going on. So a lot of past decisions made in these kind of siloed approaches really didn't adapt to our growth and how we were trying to mature this whole collection of infrastructure. Obviously, on both sides, we had delays, a lot of effort. I can speak to the product engineering side. We've got a channel where we're talking about this upgrade of our databases. There's 50 people in there because every single service has a few engineers involved in their service, and some services are small and quite straightforward. Others are quite complex and have a lot of different moving parts to get them upgraded. So we have some tech debt. Of course, all companies, unless you were formed, a month ago, you've got some tech debt. And so we had these two different cloud platforms. We have some disparate technology stack issues. And then from a process and operational standpoint, again, given that some of these teams were rather new, we didn't have necessarily a fully matured software development lifecycle. And again, very, very siloed approach on the world of the relational DBAs and the world of kind of data transformation and beyond. And that interface wasn't really focused on that much. Okay, so Fiona and I, we started working together last fall, and again, we started to look at okay, well, collectively, what are we trying to accomplish here, right? We need to do both of these big projects. We need to make sure that we're in a good lockstep in understanding how these projects affect one another. On our side, our product needs have to do with, these are the primary needs. Well, number one, we have a fast, frequent delivery speed. So we do CI/CD. We're doing 500 deploys per month or more, and we're planning on increasing that, accelerating that. So there's no option to kind of slow things down. That's just not how our teams are built. So we're deploying code and services very, very frequently. We've got a very small storage team or database team that supports all of the different development teams' needs. So they're sort of the best practice owners. They know the most about databases. They are the experts that come to for advice. But they're supporting all of these different teams and these different needs that come at them. And then obviously they're on call for their services. And so that collection of situation was is a bit complicated when we're looking to upgrade our core relational database to the latest version, across all these different services, and that being one of our OKRs. And then on top of that, we're looking to reduce costs. Over time, we want our costs to not increase linearly with our usage. So we have some key metrics around cost per user and driving some of those costs down. Now, the common needs are pretty clear. I don't think we need to go through these things. There's nothing really that momentous, scalable, reliable, et cetera. Like, we all have some of the same common needs, but I'll pass it over to Fiona on the needs on the data side.
Right. One big take-on for us is to review data infrastructure in GCP. I see in the Q&A queue, there's people asking, why do you move to AWS to GCP? I can speak to several reasons. One is our engineering, product and engineering infrastructure has mostly already in GCP, and we wanted to keep consistency and to reduce the operational cost. So we figured out this is better to just stay in one cloud provider. That's one thing. And there are going to be more reasons. I'm not the best person to speak to, but there's some cost considerations as well. And another thing was we know that we have to unblock Andrea's team for them to be able to upgrade their MySQL version, but at the same time, don't disrupt the downstream business stakeholders for them to be able to still pulling the insights from data to support their day-to-day work and to run the business. But along the way, we're kind of debating on what technical stack we should go to. Basically building home and infrastructure which has the most flexibility, but at the same time require the longest time to invest, versus we choose vendors to do the data replication for us. And at the same time, when we choose the vendors, then how can we measure, how do we compare vendors? What is the key metrics that we want to have, right? So despite we're going to meet the short-term goal, which is we need to replace the ingestion platform and to keep the data replication pipeline running in 2 to 3 months, very short period of time, versus we still have wishes and tech debts that we want to solve. For example, we want to improve our data quality. We want to standardize the data mapping from the source to our data warehouse. We want to improve our SLA in terms of the frequency that we can deliver the data, etc. So those are the longer term. So as we start to look at the vendor, we blend the short-term and longer-term consideration. And MySQL integration is only one integration point for data. We still have dozens of source systems working for marketing, sales, PD, customer experience, that has their own data needs, which our team is responsible to figure out the overall more general data ingestion framework for the enterprise level. So I think again, now both Andrea's team and our team believes that it's a good time for us to sit down together, talk about how we scale. Yeah.
Great. So when you look at that, we sat down together and started to figure this out. There was a lot of stuff really around decision making that came up. And so this is going to reflect some of the stuff we've said earlier. But first establishing that shared vision across the teams, understanding the perspectives of both sides and how each team works, understanding what are the core technologies we have and what needs to fit around those pieces, And then really, yeah, like Fiona said, balancing those short-term needs with the long-term vision and making sure that we're not like short-circuiting that long-term vision and making sure that we're leaving that pathway open. Understanding the interdependencies of our OKRs is a really big thing. And having flexibility in both teams. And so, there's another person that's not here, and she, worked really closely with Fiona and Fiona's team, another staff engineer who helped really pull in the knowledge from the product side, and again, work closely with Fiona to help define this, this combined vision, if you will. Yeah, what else should I say about this? So yeah, we did this big technology evaluation for the data infrastructure piece that's going to take the data from between these two parts of the system. So between the product and the data infrastructure. And really, we had a lot of things to discuss around the scorecarding and all the rest. And making sure that that third party is going to scale with us and share some of the same visions that we were like literally trying to develop at the same time. So a lot of moving pieces all at once. And then, just also an acknowledgement that we had to really develop, we have to develop some wider skills around some of these practices. So moving away from focusing on data transformation and looking at the broader picture in some cases. So Fiona will get into some key examples.
Yeah, I think we really like the taking on this project and tackling the challenge because our two team sit down really close together to discuss into a lot of the technical details. For example, when Andrea's team figured out the combined replica instance actually give them a very big headache in their migration progress, we discussed, okay, what if we want to get rid of combined replica? It is an assumption that has been said even before I joined, before that staff engineer joined FreshBooks, and we've taken it as granted, and it's kind of a set stone fact saying you start from this combined replica. Then we feel relieved when we think about what if we don't have this combined replica. What if we just let our data pipeline directly connected to more than one database instance? What will break? I think we acknowledge that, yes, that will basically, in short term, it will make us more tightly coupled with each other, because whenever they decided to increase, add one more instance, whenever they decided to move shards from one instance to another, yes, those technical details are unnecessarily exposed to data team. But on the flip side, we see this as a good opportunity, because on one side, we think this is the right thing to do. On the second side, yes, we acknowledge the short-term challenge and cons. But at the third time, I think it's also encourage us to think about how can we decouple this to team and allow flexibility for each team to choose their own technology, what we can do there. And there has been some very good idea about establish, talk about how we set up the domain boundary, how we can figure out basically establish data contracts, talk about golden data set in between the domains. Those are all good conversations that comes out from it. So we'd say we kind of love those balance. And also when we choose the vendor that go along with us, we realize that we're actually choosing to shifting our mentality from doing ETL towards ELT, and got opportunity to compare what's the pros and cons of these like two different mentality and methodology. And so those are just like two examples where we were able to sit down together from different aspects and to bringing different opinions and be able to debating with each other and come up with some solution that we believe is better for longer term goal.
How do you serve data of petabytes size to businesses? Do you give them a report with 1 petabyte to analyze?
I guess that's a question for me. But first, I think, well, this is not for, started to feel giddy. This is not actually about FreshBooks. This is happening in our previous company. I think the first right step we choose is to centralize data into BigQuery, and not to advertise BigQuery, but BigQuery does support us to run petabytes of data analytics, and we were able to basically aggregate data cross departments, cross domains, and we see like when you just look at individual customers or devices, you're not going to get very like creative insights than just business intelligence. But if you look at data on an aggregated level, that's going to give you really creative thinking about how data can tell you about the surrounding world and society. Yeah, I think centralized data warehouse is the first step.
What is Data Robot in the diagram? And maybe if you can give us a little 30-second tidbit about who and what Data Robot are and what they do.
Oh, it's a third-party tool that our data scientists use for their model, for data scientists model.
Perfect. Short, sweet, to the point. Love it. Conway's Law says that the software that gets built, it is a mirror to the organizational structure. Do you think that rings true for FreshBooks?
We've talked about that before, and we've talked about it more in the context of within engineering, product engineering, and how our product teams are structured versus our technology teams are structured. And we actually made some changes at the beginning of this year to try and overcome some barriers we had there. And so I think you're probably right. Some of that also applies here. And so Fiona and I have been trying to break down those barriers, but there is a bigger question as to how do we reinforce that, amongst other folks. We are two separate organizations. We have a CTO, we have a CDO. So we're not exactly going to combine those things. But yeah, we have to stay in touch on these key questions and make sure that we're sharing information and, kind of the notion of the dotted lines, not in a reporting structure sense, but in a sharing of information and outcomes and goals.
What does your CI/CD pipeline look like when it comes to your data infrastructure?
We have, so our data transformation is leveraging dbt, which gives you a way to write SQL queries as a piece of software application, where you can apply unit tests and behavior tests, and we run so once the code, once you have a PR there, our Jenkins will run the CI pipelines to go through all those like unit tests, behavior tests, and then the basically the CD pipelines will just deploy which is happening around deck, I believe, to deploy the pipelines to the Cloud Composer, which is the Google hosted version of Apache Airflow.
What big data processing framework did you choose for data movement into the cloud?
Data movement basically begins from extract data or load data from external systems to data environment, and then transform and then be like shared to. If that's the right interpretation of this question, is like we, for a lot of the legacy reasons, we use various tools. We use more than one vendors to move data from external source system to our data environment. We, as I said, we use dbt and Airflow to schedule our data transformation work, but we also have places where we use cloud data flow to do transformation work, jobs for stream data, and used to have like AWS Redshift and now Google BigQuery as a data warehouse. And consumptions we mostly through the batch file share through cloud storage. We're still in a journey of standardize a lot of this framework now.
So similar question there, talking about the data movement costs and how did you manage during development and what policies did you enforce there?
Yeah, I don't think the data movement cost was a huge source of cost for some reason. I'm just thinking through my head to the different costs I've seen. We actually have a lot of copies of our data for a variety of reasons, a lot of different backups. And so I think like our costs are actually, our cost management is a little, needs some work in some other areas, and that the movement costs were actually not a huge factor for us for whatever reason. We did also have some committed spend in both AWS and GCP that we had to manage through. So yeah, suffice to say that the movement itself for us wasn't one of the major factors, but that we were looking at costs a lot, believe me.
I can imagine.